Welcome to the 35th episode of the series Decolonizing the Mind. I'm doing a sub series on the future of the decolonial movement, and this is part two of that sub series. The part two deals with the theoretical framework of the European Enlightenment. It's important to understand that decolonial theory, in my view, is an alternative to the European Enlightenment. And there are two narratives of the European Enlightenment that we have to deal with. One is liberalism and the other is Marxism. Liberalism is based on the concept of the individual as the basic unit of society and individualism as the basic value of its ethics. The economic theory and structure of liberalism is based on the freedom of the individual capitalist to exploit labor by using free markets and private ownership of means of production. The political system is based on multi-party parliamentary democracy. This is a theory because many of the capitalist countries are dictatorships in the global south, and many countries are just kingdoms where the head of state has never been elected by the population. But anyway, this is the theory. The cultural system is based on the scientific knowledge generated by the European Enlightenment and specifically, obviously, by liberalism. Its view on world history is that with capitalism, human history has come to an end, and liberalism is the apex, the top of human development. Now, liberalism has been the ideology that justifies capitalist oppression and colonialism. But there was another side of liberalism as an ideology of liberation, starting with the European Enlightenment, where the Enlightenment philosophers, Immanuel Kant wrote an essay on the Enlightenment, regarded the Enlightenment as a liberation philosophy, a liberation of the mind. Because in those times, we're talking about the 18th centuries, people in Europe had to learn to obey the ruler, the tax collector, the police, the clergyman. The mind was not free to think, but only obliged to obey. And Kant defined the purpose of enlightenment as the need to liberate the individual mind. And I quote him, he says, "Enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturity. Immaturity is the inability to use one's own understanding without the guidance of another." He's meaning the Christian theologians. This immaturity is self-incurred if its cause is not lack of understanding but lack of resolution and courage to use it without the guidance of another. The motto of enlightenment is therefore sapere aude, Latin for have the courage to use your own understanding. Now, in the 21st century, liberalism is also used as an ideology of liberation in many social movements, especially in the global north. For example, I dealt with it in the episode 33 about other theories of racism, where theories like white privilege and intersectionality puts the experience of the individual at the core of the theories. They are basically liberal theories of liberation, although liberalism in many social movements by those who adhere to the theory of white privilege and intersectionality regard liberalism as a ideology of the oppressor, but yet they are making use of the core concept of liberalism to articulate their own philosophy of liberation. And then you have Marxism, and I'll deal with classical Marxism because I'll show that there are some changes in Marxism. The classical theory of Marxism, the core concept is the labor theory of value. And the labor theory of value is a theory that said that the value of a commodity is based on the average number of labor hours required to produce it. So, surplus value now is the difference between the value that a society produce and the ruling class then in a class society obtains this value from the sale of commodities, and then the value that the labor receives, if you subtract that value of the total value that's produced, then you got a surplus value. And capitalism is a peculiar system where the appropriation of surplus value is done through wage labor and the market mechanisms combined with private ownership of the means of production. The capitalist owns the means of production, employs the labor, gets a commodity. In a slave society, the ruling class just forces the labor to work for free and obtains the value and decides what he gives for the reproduction of labor, of slave labor and slave labor. But in capitalism is different. The labor gets a wage depending on the labor market. Its product are owned through the private mean of productions and the market by the capitalist. The capitalist uses the market, sells the product, and then the difference is uh, his profit, but basically the appropriation of surplus value. Now, the social theory of Marxism is based on this concept of surplus value. And it says that you have classes in a society. A class is related to ownership of the means of production. The capitalist owns the means of production. The laborers don't own the means of production. And the struggle in society, the social struggle, is a class struggle. And it can be interwoven with other struggle, national liberation, women's struggle, race, ethnicity, but the basis is class struggle. That is what determines the struggle in a society. And the end of the world is a classless society, a communist society. And that is Marxist social theory. And then in the political theory, um, the concept of class extends to the state, saying that the state, which means the government, the police, the army, the security services, the government structures, educations, etc., are in the service of the ruling class, the capitalist class. So, because the state is structured like that, class struggle means that the oppressed classes, the working classes, should take over the state, destroy it, and create a new state. And at the end of the day, that state will wither away in a classless communist society. And then the that society is a secular society because religion and non-scientific knowledge is not valid knowledge. So secularism is the basis of the culture. Now, Marxism has been a very important theory in since the Russian Revolution and before that. But the Russian Revolution gave it a big boost, and it became the leading theory of liberation and led to the rise of socialist bloc. The Russian Revolution, uh, achieved its victory in 1917. In 1924, Mongolia saw the establishment of the Mongolian People's Republic, and between 1945 and 1949, within 5 years, basically through the defeat of Nazism in World War II in Europe, in Eastern Europe, Albania, Poland, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and East Germany, they became socialist. And outside of Europe, China and Vietnam uh, became independent socialist countries, and North Korea. Now, socialism was an attractive narrative of liberation for many countries fighting against colonialism and for freedom. And Between 1950 and 1989, 11 countries joined the Socialist Bloc: Cuba, Laos, Afghanistan, Angola, Benin, Cambodia, Congo, Brazzaville, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Somalia, and South Yemen. And they had a one party system and a planned economy. And there were other countries, not with a one party system, but some kind of central planning. Bangladesh, Guinea Bissau, Guyana, India, Nepal, Portugal, Sao Tome and Principe, Sri Lanka, and Tanzania. So you see, the socialist bloc represented two-thirds of the world population. And, um, and this is the shocking thing that it existed, and then you get a decline of Marxism, beginning with the revelations by the party leader after the death of Stalin in 1956. Nikita Khrushchev revealed the crimes of Stalin, how Stalin basically killed millions of people in the Soviet Union, and the basis of Marxism and socialism as a system of liberation and freedom was shattered by those revelations. And it took only, what, about 30 years after this revelation that the Soviet Union ceased to exist, and socialism imploded and destroyed itself. Now, the collapse of the Soviet Union is a very important story, and at some point I might go more deeper into it. But it's important to understand that the initial gains of the Soviet Union, the Russian Revolution, was immense. Women, LGBT, oppressed nationality, full employment with central planning. These were tangible gains for people. Um, for example, civil partnership was introduced, church weddings were abolished, divorce was a matter of choice, abortion was legalized, homosexuality was decriminalized, and gay marriages were legalized. The oppressed nationality had the right to establish their own state, education was free, and now you wonder, how is it possible that with all these advantages, Soviet Union declined and basically was dissolved? In order to understand that, you have to understand what happened to the majority of the population. They developed a corrupt bureaucracy within the Soviet system. Stalinism imposed the policy of forced collectivization in agriculture, leading to 10 million peasants dead, and millions more were executed due to political reasons. So you got a system with no freedom, and at the end of the day, serve the interests of a corrupt bureaucracy and not anymore of the masses of the people. And that led to the collapse of the economy in 1980. And 25 years after desalinization. And then the leadership, specifically Gorbachev of the Communist Party, tried to find an answer in first perestroika, meaning the restructuring of economy and society, and later followed and combined with glasnost, which is opening up society for public discussions and participation. But the effect was that a lot of groups came with glasnost, organization arise independent of the political party, basically arguing whether the Communist Party had the right to be the sole political party, and all this led to the decline of the Soviet Union and ultimately the dissolution of the state. So that was another force that was a blow to Marxism. and the credibility and authority of Marxism. But then you get socialists and Marxists with a pragmatic approach to social and political problems and economic problems, which then led to basically saving Marxism. And the biggest one, obviously, is China. China had a revolution in 1949, which was a peasant revolution, not a workers' revolution. Um, and the immediate impact of the revolution was great, increase in literacy and life expectancy. But then the economic policies that came out of it were disastrous. The Great Leap Forward was one of these economic policies executed between 1958 and 1962 and led to the starvation of 16.5 million people. These are official figures from the Chinese government. And then in 1966, 4 years after the Great Leap Forward, you have the disastrous political change and the Cultural Revolution, which led to the death of 20 million people. And then came Deng Xiaoping after that, and he instituted fundamental changes. He led it. Obviously, there were a group of people in the party who instituted it, but Deng Xiaoping, in my view, one of the greatest innovative thinkers, of the 20th century. And he tackles on the theoretical questions. I will do a sub-series on China in the future and go more in detail into it. But basically, he argues the aim of socialism is to improve the life of the people, and he uses the Marxist concept of production forces, meaning technology, economic base, the resources of a society. You need to develop those. And he then argued entrepreneurs can play a big role in developing the production forces, and that could lead to poverty alleviation. And poverty alleviation is more than an increase in income, it's a drastic change in the living standard of the people. Um, and what this means in practical life for the people is something I'll go into at another time. But it's not only income, it's culture, the ability to have health insurance, the difference between the rural and areas and the urban areas, the increase of mobility through infrastructure, housing. Many things come with poverty alleviation. Then in Venezuela, we had Hugo Chavez, who articulated, a concept of socialism in the 21st century. And he says the only way to save the world is through socialism, but a socialism that exists within a democracy. There's no dictatorship there. And he evaluates the developments in the Soviet Union. And he says in the Soviet Union there was never democracy. There wasn't socialism, referring to Stalinism. It was diverted and the leaders didn't realize it, or if they realized it, were incapable of changing things, and it became a beaten empire. That fault doesn't lie solely with Soviet Union. The blame also lies with all the external aggression, economic sabotage, biological and bacterial wars, bombing and explosions in the Soviet oil industry, as well as the contradiction, the deficiency, the culture. That's why socialism of the 21st century, which has resurfaced here as if from the dead, is something new. It has to be truly new, and one of the things that is fundamentally new in our model is the democratic character, a new democratic hegemony which obliges us not to impose but rather to convince. And that is where we are coming from, the subject of the media communication, of our arguments, so that the whole country is aware of what we are presenting today, of how we can achieve it, of how we can make it happen, a change in culture. An impact on a cultural level is vital for the revolutionary process and for the construction of a 21st century socialist democracy in Venezuela. Interesting concepts. Um, and you have a similar thing in Bolivia, where Evo Morales came to power, the first native president of Bolivia in 2005. There was a constitution written, approved by more than 60% of the people, and Article 9 defines the function of the state, and one of the functions is to construct a just and harmonious society built on decolonization without discrimination or exploitation, with full social justice in order to strengthen the plurinational identities. So he's not talking particularly about a classless society, but a just society, a harmonious society, a decolonial society. And Article 78 on the section on education outlines the purpose of higher education, and education is unitary, public, universal, democratic, participatory, communitarian, decolonizing, and of quality. So now socialism is combined with decolonization, and now even linked it with civilization. If Morales says capitalism has created a civilization that is wasteful, consumerist, exclusive, clientelist, a generator of opulence and misery. That's a pattern of life, production and consumption that we urgently need to transform. And the main task ahead is to destroy imperialism and build a civilizing horizon of living well buen vivir in harmony and equilibrium with modern nature. So you get ecology, civilization, decolonization combined with socialism. That's interesting. So if you want to know more in the book, you could look into the introduction and in the index on China and Bolivia and Venezuela. You could download the PowerPoint of this presentation. And if you want to support the DTM channel, subscribe to it, share it with friends, families, and colleagues, and encourage them to subscribe. Get involved in discussion groups. And if you want to make a donation, go at sandohira.com to see how you can do it. So thank you for watching this episode, and see you the next time.